Okay, so here we are looking at the design of a split definition, a small split definition. So you see, we have the sacral, the G center, the throat, and the solar plexus, which are all connected to each other through channels. And then over here on its own little island, we have the root and the spleen connected to each other. And what makes this a small split is that one single gate would be able to bridge these two different islands of definition. Whereas, let's say if somebody had their ajna and their head connected to each other, and then had their, let's say, their root and their spleen connected to each other, that person would be considered a wide split because it would take many channels and centers to bridge that definition. And so anytime we're dealing with splits, whether it's a single split like this, or it's triple split or quadruple split, we're looking at someone who needs time and access to different types of energies in order to feel clarity, in order to feel like the different parts of them can all get together and communicate to help them understand how to move forward. And so, interestingly, with single splits like this, Bra used to talk about these people as really the ones who are here to like be the puzzle pieces that keep relationships and groups together. Because if you think about it, there's a very significant mechanical advantage to, being really skilled and gifted at communicating and compromising when you actually need energy from others in order to understand how your own internal workings are operating together. Whereas single definition people like myself, we're often very oblivious to the needs of a relationship. And so, just as a little side note tangent here, it can be really helpful for people who are split definition and people who are single definition to understand this about each other. And as a single definition person, I've gotten really good at asking split definition people in my life, what it is that they need from the relationship. And, on the flip side, as a split definition person, it's good to communicate those needs because as a single definition person, we're not mind readers and we're often not intuitive to what those needs are going to be. And on another note, when we're looking at splits like this, whenever we look at the bridging gates, these are going to be areas where you're basically always looking for people to hook into there, which also means that for better or worse, these are going to be areas where you experience a lot of conditioning. Now, I feel like in the human design community, sometimes conditioning can be misconstrued as this only negative thing, whereas conditioning is neither inherently positive or negative. We're actually all here to condition each other. But where it becomes destructive is when we consistently take in conditioning in an area and then we assume that there's something wrong with us when we can't hold on to that energy ourselves. So, really, when I look at any open area in a chart, whether it's an open center or it's a gate that's not defined, especially if it's a bridging gate, what I'm really looking at here are places where we are vulnerable to letting our conditioning or not self overrun our strategy and authority. Because it always, always, always comes back to strategy and authority. There's nothing to do or fix about our openness, whether it be our centers or our gates that are open. All that there is to do is just be aware that, okay, this is where my mind will hijack me and try to convince me not to follow my strategy and authority. So, for you in particular, for example, like looking at your undefined heart, the undefined heart has a not self theme of, trying to prove that it's worthy and valuable and productive and all those sorts of things. So, really, what your undefined heart is doing is it's trying to say, hey, think of all the times in our life that we have felt frustration. If we can prove that we're worthy, if we can prove that we're a hard worker, and that we can, especially because you have 21 hanging. So it's like if you can provide, we can prove that we can provide resources for our community, then we won't ever have to feel frustration ever again. When really that's a lie. Really, the only way to not feel frustration is to wait to respond and to ride out your emotional wave. And when you have the clarity to say yes or no to something, but your mind will try to convince you to take action on something prematurely without following your strategy and authority because it's like we don't want to feel frustration, so let's just go ahead and prove ourselves and prove that we can be really productive, that if we get a bunch of different certifications in something that will be qualified, all the things, as like a way to have a shortcut, because the mind and the not self is always trying to find shortcuts in life. So for most people, their undefined centers are going to be where they feel that conditioning the most, or where their mind is trying to make those shortcuts and those compensations the most. But in a split definition person like yourself, you'll likely feel your conditioning a lot more in your bridging gates. And these can become almost like core wounds. Like, if only I had this thing, then I would never feel frustration ever again. And what's really interesting is most people will have like anywhere from 1 to 5 bridging gates. You have 7, which is a lot. So this is neither good nor bad. It's just what I see sometimes, like for example, if someone has only one bridging gate, that'll become like their whole life focus. Like, I heard a story one time about someone who had one bridging gate, and it was gate 52, which is also one of yours. But gate 52 is all about stillness. So this person in particular was like obsessed with meditation and was like a meditation guide and a meditation master, and felt like if he could just figure out how to be still, that it would solve all of his problems. But for you, because you have 7 different bridging gates, there's not going to be so much of a focus or an emphasis on one, which is which is in a way nice, but then there's also going to be, I guess, lots of different themes to pay attention to. And for you, the one I would look at first would be gate 57. And the reason for that is because you have 3420 in your conscious nodes, and the nodes have a big influence in our lives over our environment and our perspective and the way that we see things. And our nodes are what pull us along our trajectory and kind of bring the correct people into our lives. And for you, will bring um, the correct things to respond to, the correct things to investigate. This is how basically the right things come into your field. And the 3420 is always going to be looking to connect to somebody who has a hanging 57. And not only does this bridge your split, but as a 3420, this is also the channel. It's also important because this is the channel that determines your type as a manifesting generator. This is the channel that defines your sacral. It is the only purely manifesting generator channel in the whole chart. And this is a design of busyness. So the 34 is basically the raw power to bring action. And the 20 is basically existential awareness in the now. Each one of these throat gates has a specific voice. The 16, for example, says I experiment. The 20 literally just says I am. And so when you connect the 20 to the 34, it's literally just I am busy or I am in action now. And the reason why it's always looking for the 57 is because the 57 is the awareness of what you're doing and why you're doing it. So there can be a tendency here to get lost in your own momentum, such that you're doing things and you may not necessarily even know why you're doing them. You're just literally doing them because you have so much energy and you need to keep yourself busy. So the wound here that you could feel would be like, if only I had the insight or the foresight to know why I'm doing what I'm doing, or to know what to do in order to better direct my energy, then I would never have to feel frustrated. The 57 is also, I think of it as like it's like the psychic, um, it's like the psychic gate. It's like the ability to know that something's gonna happen before it happens. Like, I heard a story on Instagram the other day of this woman who has the 57, and um, before her husband left for work one morning, she got this like intuition that he was going to hurt himself and exactly how he was going to hurt himself. But she's so used to people telling her that, like, oh, don't be so paranoid. So all she said to him was, be careful. Well, later in the day, he called her, and um, and she knew exactly why he was calling. And when he told her that he sliced his finger open, she was like, "Oh, it was the jack, wasn't it?" And he's like, "How did you know?" And she's like, "I just had this insight, this foresight this morning before you left, that something was going to happen." So for you, because you don't have the 57, there can be this longing, like, if only I was like psychic, or if only I knew what I was doing, or knew what was going to happen, or this like fear of the future. And so again, this is all about acceptance. So having the awareness that, okay, maybe this isn't your strength, it doesn't mean that there's anything wrong with you, right? And it doesn't mean that there's anything to compensate for. Um, but what it can mean is maybe a little bit more um, leniency with yourself, or softness with yourself, and allowing other people in your life to be kind of the people that you invite in to see for you. Maybe you have projectors in your life um, who can give you guidance as to, like, okay, this is how you could use your energy more efficiently. You don't actually have to be the person who sees what you're doing, if that makes sense. So to give you some more examples of how the other ones would look, let's go let's go here. So interestingly, you also have the 9 and the 16 in your unconscious nodes, which then form two of your other bridging gates, the 48 and the 52. So with the 48 is called the well and the depth. So the 16 on the other side is all about having the skills and basically having, it's kind of like the yes man, it's like one of the yes man gates. 29 is, I would say, more about like responding to opportunities, whereas the 16 is like, I'm willing to try it and I'm willing to repeat a skill over and over again in order to achieve mastery. But what can happen is, if you have the 16 but you don't have the 48, is this longing of like, if only I knew what skills to master, if only I had the depth to carry it through. It's like you're always willing to experiment, but you don't necessarily know what to experiment on. And so this can lead to this wound of feeling like, oh, like I'm just not deep enough, or I just don't have enough knowledge, which can especially be really hard as a 1-3, because you're already, as a 1-3, looking for a foundation. And if you have this, like, this open 48 that would be a bridge for you, then you're wondering, like, why don't I have the depth? So this one to me is more about trusting that the right people will come along to focus your experimentation and your efforts. And especially having a third line body, like where to focus your, where you're going to get your hands messy, and where you're going to break the bond and break down the foundation so you can build a new one. And then the 52, this is a special one for me. I have the 52 in my conscious earth. So I'm very familiar with the 52. To me, I'm always looking for the 9, which is interesting. So the 52 is all about stillness. So for me, because I have the 52, but I don't have the 9, I have this ability to sit still for hours, but I don't necessarily know what to focus on. So for you, you know what to focus on. You have a tremendous capacity to see details, but you might not necessarily have the ability to sit still to focus on those details. So I think of this as like the ADHD gate, because it's like you see so many details, but until a 52 comes along to like get you to sit down and actually do something with what you see, you're just going to be running around and it'll appear very restless because you see all these different patterns, um, but you don't have the concentration. Whereas someone who has opposites, like me, having the 52, there's a vulnerability there to having depression or having guilt of like, why am I sitting down doing nothing? And how come I don't know what to focus on? So here for you, there needs to be this cultivated acceptance of like, okay, maybe I'm not going to be the master Buddha who sits under the tree, who can sit for hours. But I do have this incredible eye for details, and when the right people come into my life, we can together create this field of determination and concentration. But it's not necessarily something I'm here to do by myself. And again, the way that the right people are going to come into your life to form that electromagnetic in order for you to use that type of energy would be strategy and authority, right? It's like, it seems like a broken record, but it really is the answer to everything. Okay, now I'll just kind of briefly go over the others in no particular order. It's interesting, the 27 is transiting right now, so you might feel some clarity right now along the lines of caring and responsibility. So the 50, which you have, is kind of like the lawmaker of the tribe. It's the ability to see the responsibilities, to understand, okay, what systems need to be put in place in order to preserve our society, to um, preserve our children, to help them grow, to help them learn, what educational systems need to be in place, all that sort of thing. The 27 is the actual energy to make that happen, the energy to care for somebody. So someone who has a 50 but not the 27 can feel like, oh my gosh, I need to take, not only do I need to take responsibility for everybody, but I actually have to be the one who actually cares for everybody as well. So there can be a wound here, especially I see this in moms. Is like, if only I had the energy to fully nurture this responsibility, um, to like physically take care of everyone. And so for here, this is again, right, this is always about acceptance. So it's like, where can I accept in myself that even though I have a lot of energy, I may not necessarily have the energy to take care of everyone all the time? And how can I take like a more hands off approach? And instead of like being the one to physically, you know, like cook the meals and bathe the children and like be the teacher who sits down with the student and is like actually doing the math problems with them, where can I delegate these responsibilities, where can I foster independence in those around me, where can I like set up systems so that I don't have to be the one doing everything, or even sometimes it's as simple as asking for more help or saying who's in your immediate network to help you with things like that. Or just simply like, where can you start saying no? Like, where have you said yes to taking care of someone or something where maybe it wasn't even your responsibility, right? You just kind of felt like, oh, if I cared for this person, then I could prove my worth and I wouldn't have to feel frustrated. Because in a way, this will always also tie into your undefined heart of trying to prove yourself. Like, even when you, kind of like a little side tangent, but when you look at like your open ajna, open head, your open head is going to be like, I need to answer everybody else's questions and solve everybody else's problems in order to prove that I'm worthy, so that I would never have to feel frustration again. Or the ajna, I have to prove that I'm certain, right? So it always comes back to this like trying to prove yourself. And along the same lines, you have this gate 19, which is also very tribal, like the 27. It's in the tribal circuitry. And the 19 is sensitive to the material needs of others. So it's like, if only I could just feed everyone, if only I could, feed the the hungry and take care of the poor, then, there would never need to be any war and everybody would just get along. But again, that may not necessarily be your responsibility in that moment. It could be if it's something that your sacral responds to, and gives you very clear yes towards. But my guess is that with both the 27 and the 19 as wounds for you, as places where you feel like, oh, like if I had those, I'd feel complete. Um, there probably is some tribal conditioning there where you're trying to be much more of a tribal oriented person than you actually are. You're actually a pure individual. Interestingly enough, I'm just now noticing every single channel you have is an individual channel. That's fascinating. Pure individuals are here for mutation. They're here to be unique. They're here to be, in some ways, outsiders. Like they're here to be the creatives of their friends and family. It's like the people who, uh, it's like love them or hate them, right? It's like the people who are actually your people will be open to being mutated by you. Will be open to changing and hearing your unique perspectives that are very different from the rest of the group. And she may feel this pull to being more tribal because of these gates. The 55 here is an interesting one. I also have the 39 hanging, so I definitely relate a little bit to this struggle where the 39 is here to provoke emotion. And so for you not having the 39 but not having the 55, there can be this tendency to wonder like, why can't I release emotional energy on my own? Now for you, um you may not feel this as much just because you have the channel of openness, which is part of the same emotional stream. So you may be really good at expressing your emotions verbally when the time is right, when you're in the mood and when you're with the right people. There's still an element of caution with this channel as far as expression, but there may be um, the ability to express yourself emotionally through speaking, through talking it out, but not as much physically. So when I think of like channels that go from the solar plexus to the throat, you can more easily express your emotions through your voice. Whereas solar plexus to the root, this is more about like the physical expression of emotion. So dancing, crying, moving, you know, screaming. I guess screaming could be more voice, but I think you get what I mean. Now, Ra also warned with this type of configuration, the 39 uh, can provoke into excess, meaning that can provoke um, substance substance use problems or eating disorders if it feels like it can't release its emotions in a healthy way. So just something to be aware of, I guess, is like having the right people and the right spaces in your life where you feel like you have a healthy way to express your emotions and to release. It'll be very clear to you as a 39 who in your life is correct, because if you're constantly if people are constantly irritated around you, you're provoking people into irritation, um, then they're just probably not your people. Versus people who, um, there's a balance. Like, man, maybe sometimes you provoke them into irritation, but sometimes you provoke them into joy. Sometimes you provoke them into passion. Um, those are going to be more your people. They're going to be more open to you. You're going to be more open to them. They're going to be good mirrors for you as far as like when you provoke an emotion in them, it's actually probably going to be the emotion that you're feeling. Um, and then that person helps you see that. Okay, and then the 41 is another really interesting one. I find all these channels, all these root to solar plexus channels to be really fascinating. I have the 41. It's also funny. I think I have three of your bridging gates. So funny that we ended up connecting uh, in order to do this. It's just, of course, it's just mechanical. Mechanics never lie. But yeah, so it's interesting. If you have the 30, The 30 is the gate of desire. So within the 30 lives all sorts of emotional yearnings, and this desire to have new experiences. But without the 41, it doesn't have like a singular focus on how it wants to channel that desire. So we'll often just like jump into having all these experiences in order to feel something. It's like, oh, I just want to feel something. But it doesn't actually know what it wants. That's the irony. It's like the gate of desire, but without the 41, it doesn't always know what it wants. Whereas me having the 41, um, this is a gate of fantasy. So like I can fantasize all day long, but I may not have the desire to move on it. um, so I have the ability to sit still and fantasize without the energy to actually do anything about it. So I can see like gate 30s sometimes be like, oh, if only I was more creative, if only I had, more fantasy, more imagination in my life, like a tendency to be really focused on like fantasy novels or whatever your thing is, whether it's like for some people sci-fi or uh romantic novels, whatever it is, to like really try to get that fantasy from somewhere. So for me, I don't see this one being necessarily as much of a wound for you unless you're jumping into experiences too soon before you have emotional clarity. And if that's the case, really the solution is just waiting, waiting longer for your emotional wave to write itself out before you respond to certain experiences. And it's important to not be attached to certain emotional experiences having this gate hanging as well. Um, yeah, I remember Ross saying once something like, with this channel particularly, it's like the only control you have is over the clarity with which you enter into an experience, not the outcome itself. It's like you're here to just kind of have experiences and process them after they happen. And it's funny because sometimes those experiences will be correct, meaning you'll enter into them through your strategy and authority, but you still won't necessarily know why you had that experience until after it happened. So, yeah, anyways, I think that is all of them. But to wrap it up, like I said, there's nothing to do about your splits other than to be aware of them and try not to let them run your life. Always coming back to the wisdom of your body, what your body's responding to, giving yourself lots of time to wait. Um, and also, it can be really helpful and interesting to start to pay attention to who in your life has these different bridging gates and who you connect to and what flavor of relationship, what flavors they bring to that relationship and what types of clarity they bring to your interactions.